Hi, this is Roger Moore, and you're listening to James Bond Radio.
Hello and welcome to James Bond Radio episode number 145. Today we are continuing our Goldeneye discussions. My name is Tom Sears and I'm joined as per usual by my brother from another mother, Mr. Chris Wright. How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing very well, Tommy. Into part 2 of Goldeneye, the middle third, as some people will say. Now, I think after last week, we pretty much praised that first act, didn't we? That first third of Goldeneye. We both came out really pumped after like a quality sort of first third. Do you think this middle third is going to stand up to that first third that we reviewed?
Here's how things typically go. When you hear people criticise Bond in general, it usually goes, it starts off all right and then loses it at the end, don't they? You know, people say that about Never Say Never Again or Moonraker or, you know, whichever other ones they're having a chat about. Or, indeed, there you go. So yeah, I don't know whether that's a continuing thread through the series. We will find out. But yeah, I would say usually with most films, they start off very strong, don't they? Like, this isn't Bond, I'm talking just generally of films.
In general.
Start off very strong, and then there's a little bit in the middle sometimes where I notice myself just thinking, you know what, I just need to check my phone quickly just to see if any developments have happened in the last half an hour. And then you just kind of wander a little bit, and then sometimes that's the point where it loses you. And then sometimes you either get drawn back in or you don't, or, you know, scrolling through, you know, Instagram or whatever becomes more appealing. So it's a dangerous part of a film, I think, is the middle bit, isn't it? Because especially with something like a Bond where you've got to get all those tropes in, you've got to get all the key things, especially when it's a new dude for the first time. You've got to make sure everything's in its place and it's hitting all the right beats. But then, you know, in the middle, you got a lot of, okay, let's bring the story forward. We've got some exposition. We've got to kind of get stuck in there. So it's not always like an action-y set piece. It's more of a, okay, we've got to tell a bit of story now, move things forward. So it's a dangerous zone. And I think it'll make an interesting discussion as we go through this. Do you think it's gonna lose your attentions, or do you think it's gonna be belted all the way through?
I don't think it's going to lose my attentions, but I'm not sure until we review it how long that level will be sustained for, whether it takes a little dip and comes back up or not, and until we review it I'm not going to know. So it's going to make an interesting sort of discussion today.
Absolutely. I tell you what, something I thought after we recorded last week, I was like, why did I not mention that? Which is the level of model work used in this film, which I would say is nothing short of genius. You know, it's like, obviously the film's dedicated to good old Derek Meddings. I think this was his last film, wasn't it? I think he died very shortly after.
Yeah, exactly.
And and it's basically, when you go back and you look at a lot of this film, you can see a lot of its kind of model work. I mean, a perfect example would be like in the opening sequences and stuff, when the plane's flying away and stuff, and the explosion, and at the end just before the credits and all that kind of stuff. You know, there's that stuff that you can kind of tell is model work, but there is also some stuff that is so good, I would challenge anybody to be able to tell that that's a model. And I tell you, one of the sequences that really makes me go fuck when I look at it is the whole seven-eyed thing. Like all of those exterior shots, the big seven-eyed dish in the background, all that kind of stuff. That is all models, and they've just used the thing of perspective to make it look like it's way in the distance. But it's obviously just like a small model placed just right so it looks right. Do you know what I mean? It's such a work of genius, that is. And there's some stuff later on as well which is just belter, and that's one of the things these days you don't see a whole lot of model work, or maybe you do, and it's so good these days that you just don't know.
Well, yeah.
But you know, it's like, let's knock it up on a computer, job done, you know.
Exactly.
I mean, if you ever one of the interesting things to watch, actually, there's a video on YouTube of when the making of the Man from U.N.C.L.E. movie with Henry Cavill and they're showing just how much the kind of background scenery and stuff was added to digitally. It's mind-blowing what it actually looked like, what they actually shot versus what you see on film. And they do like some wipes back and forth, and it's just mental how they do it. And it's all just cooked up on a computer these days. But like in those days, I would say this is probably the last Bond film where you see model work of this level. You know what I mean? Or whether they're even using models in the later ones. But this is the bollocks, is basically what I'm trying to say when it comes to the models.
Yeah, man, it's definitely a bit of a lost art there. I mean, it's tricky though, because I guess from another perspective, is digitization an art form? You know, being that skilled at adding CGI where people don't actually know it's there. Like, for instance, in The Man from U.N.C.L.E., you wouldn't have known that half of that was digital. So is that an art in form in itself? And yes, it is.
Yeah.
It's just the new age of sort of film art form compared to your old sort of model work and your effects sort of within the camera as opposed to sort of doing lots in post.
Absolutely. I think the key thing with that is what you said there, where you said, where you don't, it's so good you don't even notice. That's what I want to see. I don't want to see, a face of Daniel Craig stitched onto a frontman and into a stuntman that you just know to look at, that it's not real. If it's done to a point where I have no idea, it's seamless, then brilliant, bring it on. We'll have some more of that, please. I'll take that. But when it's kind of like, they didn't do that stunt for real because they could just take a little side turn on the computer and then it's fine. It's just done and we've done it on the cheap. That's the kind of bit where I'm like, I'm always a bit disappointed with that. But yeah, it's the new art form, and I guess maybe we're at that stage of development now where we're still in that kind of world of you can still tell, but maybe give it another 20 years and you just won't be able to, and then the problem is solved. Maybe we're in like the adolescent period of CGI. Who knows?
No, I don't think so. Because there are films that use it these days, and it's done brilliantly. And sometimes it's used to enhance a scene. Sometimes it's used just to fill a scene, like you mentioned, sort of background and stuff. And I think if it's done correctly, I guess in terms of technology will increase in 20 years' time, speed of technology, in terms of the amount of data you can use within it, that'll all increase. So from that perspective, definitely. But, there are films, definitely loads of films these days where it's done and it's done brilliantly, but you just, you just don't want to take you out of the experience of what you're viewing. That's when it doesn't work, basically. It's when you're going, what the hell is that? That's clearly not, like, just for instance, that whole Skyfall motorbike thing, they could have done it so much better if they had basically, you could have had a close-up of Daniel Craig on the motorbike, so you see it's him and he's on the motorbike, whether that motorbike itself is on sort of some sort of pulley trailer sort of thing that's pulling him along or whatever. You could have had that, and then when it is the actual stuntman, just shoot from the back or the side, and obviously make his hair exactly the same. Yeah. And then you haven't got that distortion and that sort of stuff like that, and then you'd get away with it, wouldn't you?
You would.
I think it would look better.
That's kind of like what they would do in the olden days, isn't it? Like, and there's a lot of that in this very film actually, where if you look closely, obviously you're rocking your Blu-rays these days. If you look closely, you can be like, oh, look, there's a little stuntman. That's not Pierce, And it's obviously some of the biggest stuntman kind of standout moments were in like Spy Who Loved Me and those kinds of films where it's like blatantly a stunt dude standing there. But yeah, it's interesting to kind of look at things through the ages, and I do feel like that model work. What I think is the most genius thing about that is, like when we spoke to John Glenn and those. Remember, we always talk about that scene where they're underwater and Carol Bouquet couldn't go under water, so they just did the fans and slow motion to make it look like they were underwater. It was so good. It's the genius out of the box thinking that I really enjoy about that stuff. Where we've got a problem here. How do we solve it? And it's just really thinking out of the box and being really, really clever and genius to make it happen. And like, I challenge anybody to go back and look at those Seven Eye scenes. Arumov shows up, Boris is outside having a ciggy. Like, all of that, look at that. That is all model stuff in the background there. That's not real. And it's just so genius the way that's done that, I think I applaud that. That's what arouses me, Chris.
Is it?
Amongst certain other things.
Totally agree. In terms of the model work, it was brilliant, and the fact it was dedicated to Derek, obviously, is quite fitting, seeing the amount of model work that was used in that film. So it'll be interesting to see actually if we spot any in the second part.
Absolutely,
of the film as well.
Indeed. So before we crack on, then make sure you come and join us on all the old social medias. There's Facebook, there's Twitter, there's Instagram, there's the James Bond Radio website, jamesbondradio.com. You can leave us a voicemail over there. Just click the thing on the right hand side that says send voicemail. Send us a quote. Send us a trivia question. Send us any kind of message you like, really, as long as it's nice. We don't want any nasty ones. But if you do send in a question or a trivia question or a quote or whatever, make sure you send in 2 messages, one with the question, one with the answer, so we can use them in the show. That would be lovely. Splendid stuff. Now, before we crack on and continue our Goldeneye chattage, we had a trivia question come in this week, didn't we, from a listener?
We did indeed. So the listener trivia question this week is from Mr. Daniel McGinley. Now, this is quite an interesting one. So it's more of rather than a trivia question with an answer, it's more of a question that will make us think. So basically, we're coming up with the answer. It's not a factual answer. It's based on our opinions. So this is quite an interesting one.
All right.
So should we have a listen?
Let's do it. Okay. Let's hear it from Daniel McGinley.
Hello, this is Daniel McGinley from London, calling James Bond Radio with a question that I'm really interested to know the answer to. So if you both were to join Spectre, in which department would you work and why? Counterintelligence, terrorism, revenge, or extortion? Or perhaps another department not in the title? We're really interested to get your thoughts on that. Keep up the good work, guys.
That's a very nice question.
Ooh,
I enjoy that question.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah,
I like it a lot.
Yeah.
Nice one, Daniel.
Yeah, that's food for thought, isn't it? I think there's a lot to be thinking about there, but I guess we'll think about that during our Goldeneye review, and we'll discuss that later in today's show. And
then there's an add-on bit to that, which I've just thought of, which if you remind me, we'll have a little chat about that as well.
I'll remind you about your little add-on bit. All right,
okay.
Nicely done.
Cool.
All right, then let's get on with the show.
Who are you?
My name's Bond. James Bond.
Bond.
James.
Bond, what do you think you're doing?
Keeping the British hand up, sir.
Welcome to James Bond Radio. News, reviews, and discussion of all things 007.
Pussy. As you can see, I have no problem with female authority.
Oh, pipe down, 007.
Do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to buy.
Okay then, Chris. So correct me if I'm wrong. We left good old James at the hands of M last time, didn't we? She'd given him a bit of a chewing out, a bit of a telling off. She was basically letting him know she wasn't going to, be pushed around. She's going to lay down some law, and she's got no compunction about sending him to his death, Chris. She's just going to send him out the door. But
she's not going to do it on a whim, Tom.
She's not going to do it
on a whim.
She's not going to do it on a whim. And she's going to give him a nice little bit as he goes out the door. And she says, "Come back alive," with a bit of softness in the voice. And dare I say it, a slight little grin as he walks out the door as well. Just so we know that she's got a good heart and she's not the evil queen of numbers. Is that right? Is that where we left him?
That is, what a scene that was. What a scene. Anyway, we've gone over that scene, but it is a scene. It's a killer scene. So next up then, we're in St. Petersburg with General Ourumov, and he goes to the council meeting to deliver his report on Severnaya, where we meet Defense Minister Dmitry Mishkin, who is obviously like the head of the council, and we get a little cameo here, don't we?
We certainly do, from one Michael G. Wilson. There he is on the left.
Indeed.
There, very nice.
And in some of the cameos, he's sometimes it's really obvious and he's clear and you can see him. Other times it's quite vague. Obviously, in some of them we only hear his voice, but other times it's almost like blink and you miss it. Yeah. But this one you get a really nice sort of close up of his face, and a good couple of times as well. So it's good to see old Mickey G rocking it in this particular scene.
I tell you what I really like is his dedication to the use of the moustache all these years, man. You know what I mean? It's kind of he's been rocking it for a long time now. I feel like when I see him in the making of The Spy Who Loved Me, I don't think he had it yet in those days. I think he was clean shaven, or maybe he had a beard. He had it in Moonraker, because he's definitely been bearded at some point as well.
Or did he have a beard? Yeah. Do you know what though? It's hard. It's the sort of person that if you were mates with him when you were at school, you'd imagine him still have a moustache.
You would. He
was just born with a moustache.
Yeah.
It's like
there he is. Cool, bless him. But good lad. Nice to see Michael G. I tell you what, out of all the cameos that I can think of, I think the most blink and you miss it is the Spectre one. That was so.
That's
so
very
quick. And I remember you spotted it on first viewing, didn't you? Because I remember you kind of nudged me. It was so blink and you missed it. I didn't realise why you were nudging me. I totally missed it. But there we go. So good old Ourumov. There he is. We meet Dmitry Mishkin. These two don't like each other very much, do they? You can kind of tell there's a bit of tension between the two of them.
No. Not at all. So basically, Ourumov's going to offer his resignation. He thinks everything's happy. He's fine and dandy. He's stolen the Goldeneye. He blames it on Siberian separatists. Job done. See you later. No one knows about this second Goldeneye, so I'm fine. Yeah. And then Dmitry Mishkin sort of comes back and says, "Well, what about the two missing, technicians?" and then suddenly Oromov stops, and he's like, "I only know of the one, Boris Glishenko." And then obviously Miskin mentions, Natalia Smirnova was also among the dead. Was not among the dead. And then straight away you can see the reaction. He's like, "Oh shit! Yeah. Okay, this is not going according to plan right now."
Do you know what I've noticed, especially watching it these days on a big telly with the old Blu-ray, is there's a lot of very understated stuff going on in the performances in this film.
Definitely.
And this is like that moment when it dawns on Oromov that it hasn't gone completely to plan, and you just see he doesn't do a whole lot of moving, but you just see it's almost like you see the blood drain from his face. Do you know what I mean? It's just very subtle performance, and there's a lot of that with like Bond. Pierce does a lot of that as well throughout this film, which we'll talk about in a bit. But yeah, it's very like it's good acting, man. It's really solid. I like what he does there.
It's cool, definitely. And he basically then he says, right, he's going to investigate immediately. When Mishkin basically says, well, it's a bit too soon to blame it on Siberian separatists if you don't know where your own sort of your own colleagues are, so to speak.
Yeah.
So basically Oromov then heads out, and we get, oh my god, probably one of my favourite scenes in the whole film is the Q Lab scene. Now this. Q's just so amazing in this scene. The gadgets are great, and this is the first time that we've got stunt people within the Q Lab since Goldfinger. So we haven't seen actual real stunt people because we get a couple of crazy things in the background going on, and it's just brilliant. And the first time we see Q, he's in a wheelchair, he's got his leg, and straight away you're thinking, poor old geezer, what's happened to him? Yeah. Skiing, hunting, and then rocket flies out, and you're like, man, this is why I watch James Bond.
What a geezer.
Because there's scenes like this, man. Yeah. So good.
I tell you what, there's a very similar feel between this Q Lab and the one from Living Daylights. You know, there's that, like, because I often get, there's the sofa, isn't there, that kind of eats up the technician.
Yeah.
And I often get confused whether that's Daylights or Goldeneye. It feels like that belongs in the same
vibe,
thing, yeah. But man, it's always good to see Desmond. You got to love him. It's funny, man, because you when you watch this, and obviously this is the first time you've seen him where he's looking considerably older now, isn't he? You know,
it's been that stretch of time, hasn't it?
Absolutely, stuff, you know, and he's obviously knocking on in years now, you know, and it was always the thing, even way back in the day, he had to use the cue cards, didn't he? See what I did there?
Oh yes, I like that.
And
nice.
All the rest of it, but it's a bit more obvious now, isn't it? Like when he's chatting to Pierce and stuff, you know, have you finished and all that stuff? You can just see his eyes moving to the left a little bit, where he's like looking over Pierce's shoulder. Have you not seen that? Check it out next time you watch it. Like you can just see he's kind of like chatting away, and then it's just his eyes just move to the left a little bit. And you can see he's looking over Pierce's shoulder, and then he back to Pierce, and he's kind of back and forth, and it's quite funny.
But in my mind, he'd just be checking out the lab because there's probably something going on behind Pierce's shoulder that he's just checking out in the lab.
Yeah. That's good thinking. I like that. Yeah, it's good. It's good. Now, tell me about Bond's array of gadgets this time. Are you happy with them? How do you feel about them?
I'm definitely happy with them. There's one that I'm not as happy with, but I'll tell you why. So first of all, he rocks up. We see the Z3 in the background with the parachutes that burst out. The two parachutes. Like, oh, hang on a minute, that's pretty cool. Wonder how we could use that sort of later on. But we come back to that later. So he mentions the Z3 has got a all points radar, self-destruct system, and behind the headlights, Stinger missiles. And all of that sounds brilliant, okay? The car at the time was quite, it's quite an individual looking car. You know, it looked great, really. Yeah. But that's quite contrary to what the actual type of car is. I know I mentioned this before, but if you compare it to your Aston Martins or your Lotuses or, you know, your Bentleys or whatever, it's quite a lot below that sort of level. But anyway, so we've got the gadgets and it's great. But the thing that really is disappointing is that later on in the film we don't get to see anything. He's got that little radar bit where the plane lands in front of him, and he's got that line where he tells Wade, don't push any of the buttons and all that. But I would have liked to have seen one or two things. And we worked out we worked out that his time in the DB5 was actually longer, probably screen time, than on the Z3, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I would have thought so. It is a funny one, that, isn't it? Because you get that sort of build up and you think, oh, okay, whenever Q shows Bond some gadgets on a car, you know some shit's going to go down. And this time around, it just doesn't. And I remember people would always take the piss out of me when I was at school. Like, for example, Living Daylights. Here we go, we've got this, skis will come out the side of this one, and you got this super engine on the back and blah, 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 rockets behind the headlights and all that kind of stuff. And then I remember people saying to me, well, how did he know he was going to need to have skis on his car? And I'd be like, he just fucking does, all right? Shut it. And it's just...
He's going to Austria.
He's going to where the snow is. That's all you need to know. Enough said. Whereas I suppose this is as kind of disappointing as it is that we don't really get to see it in action. And I would say the same thing for the BMW in World Is Not Enough as well. That was very short-lived. Let's just cut the thing in half before it gets a chance to do anything. As disappointing as it is, maybe there's a bit more realism in there because maybe he doesn't need to use those gadgets every single time,
No, that's true. It was quite interesting. I think there was that whole talk in the Goldfinger Q-Lab scene where Guy Hamilton... When basically Q explains all the DB5 gadgets to Bond, Guy Hamilton was like, well, no, he shouldn't be doing that because then it's not a surprise for the audience.
Yeah.
And it was Cubby that said, no, the audience need to know because then they know that that's going to happen later on in the film, and it sort of builds up the tension and the sort of excitement for when we're going to see that sort of stuff. And then after the film, Hamilton was like, yeah, 100% Cubby, you were right. Whereas in this scene, we've almost got the reverse, whereby they're telling people but not showing people afterwards. It's just one of those things. It was basically a marketing gimmick for BMW to pay Eon money to put it in their film, and that's basically what it was. But anyway, let's go on to the rest of this scene because the rest of the scene is magic. Okay, so he's got this. He shows. I like the way that he shows Bond the belt. He's like leather. 34-inch waist. Have you got a 34-inch waist, Tom? What's your waist?
Do you know what? I did. I've typically been 34, but recently I've been working hard and I've knocked it down a couple of pegs. So I'm rocking a 32 at the moment, Chris. Yeah.
So more fit than the Brosnan.
Yeah. I'm very proud of myself.
So he's got this belt and he mentions about the piton device, and I like that bit initially where Bond's like, Q, I'm familiar with that device, and that's kind of a nice little bite. The dialogue's brilliant in the scene.
I think. Sorry to interrupt you there, but I think there are two things you must really nail if you're going to be a solid Bond. Right. Number one is how you interact with M. Number two is how you interact with Q. There's actually loads of them. How you interact with Moneypenny, for example. Basically, how you are through the entire film. But I think there's a real magic to the Bond-Q relationship. And if you get it right, it is one of the best parts of the whole film. And if you don't get it right, it's kind of like, oh, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you've got to have that chemistry. Like for me, one of my favorites is the Thunderball one, where he comes in and he's got his little Hawaiian shirt on and Bond's like, oh no, as soon as he comes through the door. I love that scene. It's brilliant. I love how ill-tempered Q is. I also love the next one, Tomorrow Never Dies. I think Pierce and Q have a really good chemistry. I think they have a great chemistry in Goldeneye as well. And I would, and obviously Roger had it with him and everything as well. So I feel like you've really got to nail that thing. Q's got to be ill-tempered, but with a little level of kind of like fatherly love in there somewhere. And Bond's got to wind him up, but not in a mean way, just in a kind of like in a good-natured way. Like when you're trying to show your dad how to use the internet and he's like, what's a mouse? Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing.
Totally, man. It is. It really is. And it's just lovely to see them, like you say, in the chemistry there's brilliant. So Q, he goes on, he shows them an X-ray document scanner within a tray. And then this is where we get the background sort of stunt guy. So you get that guy that goes into the BT phone box and suddenly this airbag inflates. And it's great because it's humorous. It's like in the background, but it gives you a chuckle. Yeah. And there's a bit where one of the women in the office goes to sit down, lifts up a phone, and then suddenly a chair like flies backwards into a massive crash.
She actually injured herself, that poor bird. In the very shot that you see.
That was. Yeah, it's a bit of a shame. And then I think Pierce sent us some flowers afterwards to make her day.
What a gentleman!
What a nice guy. Yeah. But the main sort of gadget, aside from obviously the Z3, is the Class 4 grenade. This pen. So this gets quite a lot of screen time. So he basically tells Bond, okay, so 3 clicks, arms a 4-second fuse, another 3, disarms it, and then he's like, right, let's use Fred to show us how it works. And I love the way he just pops it in 1, 2, 3, and then he runs and puts his hand over his ears, and then obviously Fred blows up, and then they get that nice little line after him, don't say it.
Yeah, the writing's on the wall.
Along with the rest of him.
Very
and then
nice.
I love the way that he says that and has a little chuckle, because Q, he's enjoying it, man. And he's like, I like it when he has fun as well.
Yeah, it's nice. I tell you what's interesting, right? Something we need to discuss about this particular section. We don't exactly go in for exploding pens anymore, 007. Now, that is a diss, Chris. That is a diss if I've ever heard one. That's like saying, that was a bit of silliness. We don't do that anymore. Yeah. Now, I would say that is actually not one of the most outrageous things, is it?
Completely. Yeah. It's an everyday item that everyone would probably have, that you could use. And I think it's a genius idea. Yeah. A grenade and a pen. Fantastic. I think if you were going to say we don't go in for that sort of thing, I think invisible cars would have been a better thing to suggest.
Exactly.
It's possibly, something that's that Q could have said instead. But I think exploding pen, brilliant.
I suppose in the world of Daniel's Bond, you can't acknowledge the more outrageous things, because that doesn't exist in Daniel's universe, does it? Like, I suppose the level you could have pushed it to is something like laser watches. We don't do that kind of thing anymore, because that is obviously pushing it beyond a little bit too far. But like the exploding pen, I feel like that is an absolute real thing.
That could easily show up in Bond 25 if Q hadn't said that, and you would have thought, oh, brilliant. If it hadn't been used in Goldeneye, and in Bond 25, if Bond was given like an exploding pen, you'd think, oh, great, it would work. Of course it would.
I suppose that if Q had said, Inspector, we don't really do invisible cars anymore, Bond.
I know. I didn't really definitely say that, but you know what I mean. And then, okay, so just finally then, the end of that scene, what a line that is. Yeah. Bond picks up this big ham salad baguette or whatever it is. Don't touch that. It's my lunch. And it's so good. And every single person in the world that is watching that scene leaves that scene with a huge smile on their face. Yeah, and 100%. That's when you know that it's worked.
Yeah, it's done its job.
It's brilliant. Yeah. Completely.
Which brings me back to my statement last time about this being like a Bond greatest hits movie. Where when you think of the feeling of the time, a lot of doubts whether Bond was still relevant, Cold War's over and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Obviously the box office or lack of it for License to Kill, there's a lot of factors of like, this was such an important film for the overall future of Bond that they had to get it right. And it is that sort of greatest hits thing where you have to put in all those ingredients that everybody knows and loves Bond, especially with License to Kill being such a departure from what you'd expect, The
norm, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Very adult, very dark. You can't take your kids to it, even though it's not for your bloody kids. But whereas this time is a bit more different. It's a lot more lighthearted, isn't it? And this Q scene, I think they absolutely pinned the tail on the donkey with it. I think they got the feel just right. You could insert Roger or Sean into that scene and it would just feel right. You know what I mean? It just, in fact, I remember a lot of people saying, I remember Chris Evans saying this to Pierce when he interviewed him. I don't know which film it was for now, but I have a memory of it from back in the day when this Bond film was coming out with Pierce in it and he was being interviewed by Chris Evans. That's for any of our non-British listeners, that's not the dude that plays Captain America, it's the ginger geezer with glasses. And he was saying, what I think of you, Pierce, is that you've taken the best bits of Connery and the best bits of Moore and you've blended them together, put a little bit of your own sauce in there, and that's the Pierce Brosnan Bond. And I feel like that I think there's some truth to that, and I feel like you see that in this Q scene for sure. Yeah,
I think that's a good surmise of it in terms of because he can do the dark as well, Brosnan. Yeah. But obviously, like you said, there is a lot of humour in this film, and it works really well. Yeah. Okay, so following Q scene, Bond goes off to St. Petersburg, and we get to meet Jack Wade, CIA agent. Now, what is your opinion? First of all, what's your opinion about the character? And then what is your opinion about this scene?
Well, the first thing that struck me, Chris, is just quite how much he looks like Brad Whittaker. I thought it was his brother to begin with, but
yes, indeed.
It's a funny one, this, isn't it? Because Jack Wade, I almost feel like, we said this about Living Daylights, didn't we, with Whittaker, that he's almost a bit too buffoon to sort of be that much of a villain.
That is a perfect word.
Yeah.
That is a perfect description of him, particularly more so here.
Yeah.
I know Brad Whittaker's still pretty bad, but as supposedly a CIA agent, you think, well, their testing can't be great.
Yeah.
If they're letting in people like this guy.
Yeah, indeed. That's the thing, though, is I always thought Whittaker was too sort of like friendly and jovial and sort of buffoon-like to really have that sense of villainy about him. You know what I mean? Whereas I feel like, he's definitely more Jack Wade suits him more than Brad Whittaker, I would say. Like, I think the Jack Wade character is more of a natural kind of place for him, for old Joe Don. But yeah, so he's kind of like the buffoon. We get that great sort of back and forth between them, stiff ass Brit and all the rest of it. Show me the bros. And he's very likable. I love him. I think he's great. But at the same time, I'm like, why wouldn't you use Felix Leiter here? That's my question.
That's an interesting point now, because, that is a really interesting point. I'm thinking that, well, with the character, in terms of the buffoonery, potentially that's used to make Brosnan's Bond appear even cooler than we know he is. You know, if you put one against the other, that just elevates Bond even more against this sort of crazy guy. But in terms of not using Felix, that's an interesting point, because obviously maybe because the last time we saw him was License to Kill and things weren't looking too good.
He looked pretty chipper though, didn't he, at the end?
Well, yeah, he did look probably pretty similar to how Jack Wade is. But I know. Oh, anyway, we're not going to go there. So maybe it was to do with that. But again, it could have potentially been played. I guess I think if he hadn't been in License to Kill or there'd been some sort of different line, maybe they would have gone for it. Yeah. But but I think this whole scene is good, like another stiff-ass Brit with your secret codes and your passwords and all that. And there's that bit of, animosity between them initially. And then again, like we say, you've always got to have that at the start with Bond and his potential allies or whatever. And then the mutual respect needs to grow. Yeah. And you need to see that throughout the scene. Like we always say, like Bond and Saunders, the best sort of example of that in the whole series completely. And I think with this, you've got a little bit of that going on as well between Wade and Bond, which is quite nice. And the tattoo is great. And then and the other quite thing is, he's got this tiny little car, isn't he? And you see him driving along, and they're both like big guys squashed into this tiny little blue car, and then it breaks down, and it's quite a nice scene just because they're chatting about why Bond is over and his mission and stuff like that while they're trying to fix this car, and you kind of haven't seen that before, and I think it displays the whole sort of the typical types of cars that you'd get in Russia, not great and all this, but I do like that sort of aspect to it that you haven't sort of seen a broken down car trying to be fixed. Bond film before.
I suppose the funny thing about that is we've just gone from Q's lab where you see his shiny new motor. He's been in a DB5. It's that same thing as like For Your Eyes Only with the old 2CV, and it's that same thing, sticking him in this shitty little motor, which is there's some definite comedic value in there. For any location hunters out there, Chris, there are two key British locations, not in St. Petersburg. The airport there. Do you know where the airport is?
I would say that would have to be an airport in the UK.
It's not actually, Chris. There's a little surprising one for you. That's Ascot Racecourse of all places.
Yes, it is Ascot, yeah.
So there you go. There's a location for anybody nearby who wants a bit of that. And then obviously where the car breaks down is Somerset House, isn't it? In London on the Strand.
That's it. Have you visited Somerset House?
Absolutely, I have indeed. Yeah, many times.
Okay, cool. Nice, very nice. Okay, so so basically they're talking about Zhukovsky, aren't they? Valentin Zukovsky. Well, first of all, they talk about Yanis, and he's rumoured to being living on an old Soviet missile train. And then basically to get to him, he wants to go to Zhukovsky, and they're driving along, and basically, you know this guy? I gave him the limp. Dude. And stuff like that, and that's pretty cool.
Let's just take a moment, right? Let's just take a moment. You mentioned last time how you really like the dialogue in this film, and I will second that motion 100%. Now, That moment is so fucking brilliant. It brings a smile to my face every time, because here we go. We've got this new dude playing Bond. He's proven himself. Everybody, the first time they watched Goldeneye, especially back in the day, everyone's arms folded. All right, Pierce, let's see what you got, son. Like, see if you can pull it off, blah, blah, blah. That moment is so brilliant because it's one of those lines that just, again, like we always say about the line, Teresa was a saint, my name's Tracy, just sums up that character in one line of dialogue. We've got an entire history now between Bond and Zhukovsky that we're never going to know what the origins of that is. But immediately, those two characters are on a different level now. It's a whole different ballgame. I gave him the limp. And I tell you what, man, there is not a man on the planet who does not want to get down on their knees and receive the full girth of the Brosnan after that comment. I don't care what anybody says. I do, so do you, so does everybody else listen to this. Make no mistake about it.
Yeah, okay, that sounds good.
All right.
So next up then, where do we go? Oh, there's a little cutback there to Natalia. She goes into the IBM store, doesn't she? She's trying to get basically access to
I
the
tell you
internet.
what, she's looking for some real high-level computing power, isn't she? Bless her heart,
We did that, didn't we? We had to list all the components that she asked for. It was like CD drive or something, wasn't it? It was like 500 megabytes or something.
Jesus Christ. Compare that to what is in this phone right here nowadays is mental, isn't it? I mean, obviously it's 23 years ago now, but it is very funny how, especially you look at all those old crusty computers in the corner as well. That's how they used to look, wasn't it? Like those cream cases and big chunky monitors and all the rest of it. It's a funny old world.
It is indeed, yeah. So basically, she pretended she wanted computers for the American school and the Swedish school, and basically, she just wants to test it to try and contact Boris, and she manages to do that. And Boris says he thought she was dead, in the explosion and stuff, and she's live, and he says to trust no one. And then they arrange to meet at the church of Our Lady of Smolensk. But then when we see Natalia arrive, it's quite an eerie scene, isn't it? So she rocks up at the church. You get that sort of faint atmospheric music playing. There's that huge hanging cross, and then she sort of sees some sort of old dear with a bit of wearing a hooded cloak or something. It looks a bit weird, doesn't it? And then suddenly, like, there's a bit of gust of wind, the door shuts, and then she freaks out and legs it. And as she sort of goes to the end of the church, Boris is there and sort of stops, and he's like, it's me, it's Boris.
It's Boris, hello.
And then she sort of stops, and then I love that bit where Xenia just walks up behind her and she turns, and so, like, that's an evil presence right there. She didn't
big time.
All she had to do was to walk like 2 or 3 steps. Yeah. But that was enough to show you that she's up to no good, sort of thing. So I quite like that as a cool little scene.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Xenia doesn't even need to do a lot, does she? Bless her.
No,
she looks so striking that you can just stick her. I do enjoy some of her costumes as well, where she's not as outrageous as Fatima Blush, but she's almost
heading
there.
That way.
Yeah, she's definitely headed in that direction.
Yeah.
But you just look at her and you just you're quite taken aback.
Well, she's got those eyes like that will just be, I'd happily kill you right here, right now, sort of thing, and that's always a good thing for you.
Yeah,
for your
that is what I spotted when I had my awful encounter with her in the supermarket that time.
Oh, really? Did she give you those killer eyes?
That is the very first thing she did, sadly. Oh God.
Yeah,
that was horrible.
Time to run.
She's she is very tall as well. I would say I don't know whether she had heels on or whatever, but as she walked past me, I think she was a good inch on me, and I'm 6'1", so she must be up there in height. But funny.
Yeah. So after that, then we cut back to Zhukovsky's bar, and basically, so Wade drops Bond off, and he goes inside, and we get the classic line from Zhukovsky, where obviously, what the PPK, 7.65mm. Only 3 men I know carry a gun. I believe I've killed 2 of them, or something like that. I can't even remember that.
He almost pulled it off. We'll forgive you. Yeah. We'll forgive you for the semi-quote, but it was good enough. Now, tell me this. I hear a lot of people say that, Valentin rocks out that line, and then of course his henchman puts his gun to Bond's head, which is also a Walther PPK 7.65mm. Now that means he's wrong if that's the case. Now I the last time I kind of scanned through that scene, I was trying to see, and the lighting was a bit weird, and I can't. It very much dark, looks like a Walther PPK, but I can't 100% say that it definitely is one. If it's not, it's one that looks very, very close.
Well, it might be that's one of the if it is a PPK, I'm not sure. But if it is, it could be one of the ones from the 2 people that he's killed. So he's probably got 2 of those in his office, hasn't he?
Because I read that on a forum somewhere, and they were saying how that was a mistake. But that doesn't necessarily... He could have killed the man and then stole his gun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it does contradict the whole line in Dr. No, where it's like, these are being issued... standard issue by the CIA and stuff like that in Dr. No. So I mean, there's so many things where it contradicts a bit, but it's a good line.
It's still a great line. I love it.
Yeah, it's a great line, and Robbie Coltrane delivers it. You can tell how much fun he's having when he sort of delivers that line, which is great. So basically, obviously, they talk a bit about Bond sent to assassinate him, and Bond basically says, the skill was not to miss you, but not to hit the rest of you, sort of thing. Just. And that's quite good. Isn't
that's
it? I like
great,
that.
Man. I really, this is another one of those scenes where like they just nail it. I think the relationship between Zhukovsky and Bond, that, like I say, that one line about giving him the limp gives this scene so much more weight. And that moment where he's like strangling the cat and then shoots just between his legs, and he's like, and that my knee aches every single day, twice as bad when it is cold. Like it's so funny, but great. You know what I mean? It's not slapstick. It's just like it just sends you off on a whole different movie in your head of what the story between those two must be from back in the day.
Yeah. But again, there's that mutual respect there, isn't there? They both know, obviously. He's in Zhukovsky's place. Zhukovsky's got a lot of power and all of his men. Yeah. But Zhukovsky knows, what Bond is capable of, sort of thing. So there is that respect there, which is pretty cool. And the way he has a go at his missus is quite funny, isn't it? Well,
Minnie Driver back there in her in an early role. Yeah.
That's it. So then after that, they go to Zhukovsky's office to talk a bit. Now, this is kind of an interesting one. So this is where Bond talks about a specific deal. So I'm gonna actually say what he says, and then let's have a little discussion about it. So he says, 200 pounds of explosives hidden in a casket. Your man drives the hearse in. The money's exchanged. Their man drives the hearse out. Their man will be arrested with the explosives. Your man will make a miraculous escape with the money. Your money. Now, when you first heard that, what did you think?
I don't know. I'm quite, I still to this point. So he basically, what's happening here is Bond's going in to give Zhukovsky a deal so he will take him to Yanis, isn't it? That's what Bond wants from Zhukovsky. Zhukovsky is essentially getting paid for it. So let's look at that. 200 pounds of explosives hidden in a casket. Your man drives the hearse, the money's exchanged. Their man drives the hearse out. The man will be arrested with the explosives. Your man will make a miraculous escape with the money. So he's obviously playing. I imagine there's like a rival person, rival to Zhukovsky that they're going to basically set up and play as part of this. Yes. And that's how Zhukovsky gets paid.
Do you think that rival person is anything to do with Yanis or completely separate?
I don't know. There's not a whole lot of explaining about that, is there?
No.
I mean, why doesn't he just come in and slap some cash down on the table for Zhukovsky?
Yeah, I suppose he's getting paid quite a lot if it's money in a casket or whatever. It's probably a fair bit, but and maybe he hasn't got it to hand, sort of thing. So he needs to get the money from the treasury, get our Vespa Lynn to wire him some or something like that before he can get it out. I'm not sure.
See, to me, that sounds like something where, like, if Draco was still around. That's the sort of, like, if M wouldn't give him the operating money that he needed to get the job done, he'd give Draco a call. Draco would be like, I'll sort you out, James, don't worry, I've got this plan, here we go. That sounds more like that. Bond sort of playing with his underworld connections a little bit. Yeah.
Well, there's that little bit with Wade earlier where he's like, what are you going to do? Appeal to his heart? And Bond says, his wallet. So he knows that he's going to have to pay Zhukovsky for setting him up with Yanis. But I think it's quite cool because, again, that's something different that you don't normally hear, that sort of exchange, do you?
Yeah.
Which is quite cool. So basically, Bond tells him that Yanis stole a nuclear weapon and killed a lot of innocent Russians doing it. And this is the part where Zhukovsky kind of mentions about, he doesn't know much about Yanis, but what he does know, he's a Lienz Cossack. And now there's a couple of things here. So it goes on to explain how they went to the British, who then sent them back to Stalin and promptly had them all shot. And then Bond says a line, not exactly our finest hour. Now, what I like about that is, obviously the Bond films pro-British, British flags and everything. We are brilliant, a bit of imperialism in some of the earlier films. But here we've got a line that's actually anti-British. And well, it's truthful. It's 100% truthful. and standing up to not being not our finest hour. And I think that's good. And I think it sort of is a bit of a counterbalance within the sort of scene there.
Yeah, well, I suppose warfare is a very grey area, isn't it? You know what I mean? In terms, something like World War II, I think, is a classic example of good versus evil, isn't it? You know, like you have that bell end in Berlin causing all that trouble and doing genuinely evil things, and then to combat that, you have, situations where the goodies going up against that would have to do somewhat evil things in order to stop that from happening. And there are obviously, on a conflict that scale, there are going to be great successes and great, flag waving moments, but there are also going to be people who are on the losing side of that, or somewhere in the middle, whereby it doesn't work out perfect for everybody, and it's just the nature of the beast. So I looked up a little bit about the Liansk Cossack story, because that's obviously a real thing. So have a little butchers at this. The Liansk Cossacks were white Russians who'd fought bitterly against communism and the rise of the Soviet Union following the Russian Revolution. So they're enemies of Russia. During the Second World War, when Germany invaded the Soviet Union, the Liansk Cossacks sided with the Nazis in order to try to topple the communist regime and bring freedom to their country. The Liansk Cossacks who'd fought with the Germans were rounded up by the British. It was up to the United Kingdom to decide what to do with them. Because of the brutality of the Cossack soldiers who had murdered and raped their way along with the SS and the German army, the British wanted nothing to do with them and repatriated these Russians to the Soviet Union, where they belonged. Trains and trucks, that was in inverted commas, where they belonged. Trains and trucks were pulled up and Cossack soldiers were forced into them, as were their wives, families and children, many of whom were not even Russian, having been born in the years after the Liansk Cossacks had left Russia. The Cossacks didn't go willingly. British troops had to beat them into submission with billy clubs and rifle butts. Eventually, almost 35,000 Cossacks were transported to their mother country, where the Soviets welcomed them, again in commas. The vast majority of them were sent immediately to labour camps in Siberia, which were little better than the death camps the Nazis built. Almost all of the Liansk Cossacks repatriated back to Russia died in brutal suffering. The lucky ones didn't even make it that far, because many of the Cossacks weren't born in Russia. Their parents had left following the Russian Revolution. They were unable to be tried for treason as Soviet citizens. Therefore, the Red Army saved themselves the hassle of a military trial and executed them on the spot with a bullet through their brains. Damn.
Jeez, that's dark,
isn't
it?
Is dark. So I think that's a classic example of one of those grey area stories, in the sense that those dudes fought alongside the Nazis against the Soviets. So it's kind of like they're not really friends, but at the same time, it's like it's a very grey area, and of course that's a very dark story, especially when you hear about wives and children families, and God knows what. So that is a very uncomfortable story in British history, I imagine.
So what is your opinion of, if that side to Trevelyan's character was completely removed, and his character's main motivation was greed, was purely, I want to steal the Goldeneye, I want to break into the Bank in London, I'm going to transfer untold amounts of money, and then I'm going to fire the Goldeneye so it's all traced. Job done, Bob's your uncle, millions of dollars in the bank, happy days. Obviously you would, on top of that, you would have the 00 history that he had with Bond, and you could still have that. Do you think the film would be lesser of a film without the Liansk Cossack side, or do you think that almost overcomplicates his character a bit too much? Do
you know what? I think it's great, and I for me that just gives a bit of depth to him, because there is always that danger with your Bond villain needs to be a special kind of villain, right? There's more to being a Bond villain than there is in your typical action movie villains. You know what I mean? You could easily trot out some geezer who wants to rob a bank or whatever, and it's like, okay, John McClane, he's got to get in there and sort it out or whatever. Great, whatever. But with this, when you think about the context of the times in the film as well, in the sense that we'd had this Cold War for so long post World War II, the Berlin Wall being there and all the rest of it, and then this is the first post Cold War Bond film, and there's all that imagery throughout the whole film, isn't there? It's obviously Russia features heavily, and then in the title sequence as well, you've got the girls with the hammers and stuff, and all of that kind of and it obviously this is jumping forward a little bit, but where he finally meets Trevelyan in that sort of garden of statues, it's all a very snapshot of a time that's passed a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
totally,
that whole thing's over. So I think it only adds richness and color to it, because when you think about the original story of Goldfinger, he was just a dude that wanted to break in and steal a load of gold. Whereas the film,
not necessarily steal.
Well, in the original book,
in the novel,
sorry,
it
was just to steal the gold. Whereas in the film, obviously, there's that little twist in there which makes it infinitely better. Like it's just it's such a cool little twist to the story of that. Yeah, you know, and you look at Trevelyan, and it's like, okay, you could say the history of him being 006 is enough. Like you could say that's a cool enough thing. But then, you know, let's rob a bank, let's use the Goldeneye satellite, which, let's face it, in the 90s, when the internet was just becoming a thing, like this would have all been like, oh, brand new, which is why in the next film, when he's got his mobile phone, everyone was like, whoa, that's amazing, back in 1997. Whereas now we just be like, yeah, whatever, I can drive my car with my phone. Not quite, but you know what I'm saying.
I think you can with some, actually.
Well, Tom Cruise certainly did in the last Mission Impossible, didn't he? So it must be true.
Yeah.
So there's that. But then when you've got this whole sort of theme backstory of, you know, relic of the Cold War and the fall of the Soviet Union, is Bond still relevant and all that kind of stuff? You've got this dude who's like almost flying the last flag of that era. You know what I mean? Trying to get that extra level of revenge on Great Britain for what they did to his parents, you know? And I think it makes it infinitely richer. And especially when you read the real backstory of that, I think that's a great little touch. What do you think?
Like, because I remember hearing from some people that they weren't sure about that aspect, and I can see where the argument is coming from. But yeah, I mean, it adds to the character. It definitely adds to the character having that.
I mean, do you know what I think?
Within the setting,
I do think, like, I suppose a common statement is somebody like Dominic Green. He got a lot of stick for being a sort of a Bond villain that didn't really stand out. You know, going up after Le Chiffre was a big challenge for anybody. You know what I mean? Because Le Chiffre was so amazing, and then sandwiched between him and Silver, that's a tough spot to fill, isn't it? You know,
definitely.
And it's. I feel like Dominic needed some extra shit in there. You know, whether it was some kind of backstory like that, which he just didn't have. You know, and I feel like that's kind of what happens when you don't have that extra layer of coolness. I feel like you either need to be this sort of slightly outrageous character. You look at a Goldfinger, or you look at a Hugo Drax, or, you know, even somebody like Elliot Carver. You know what I mean? He's got that strong look to him. Do you know what I mean? He's got a very defined vibe to him, that almost a bit Steve Jobsy, you know, from back in the day. You've got that. Whereas Trevelyan is kind of like, you know, he's gone through the same training as Bond has. He's 006, you know, there's that whole thing. But I think visually, I don't think he's going to be one of those striking villains that you're going to, like, the average person on the street would look at him and go, oh, that's Alec Trevelyan, or that's that Bond villain. It's like, that's the bloke from Game of Thrones. You know what I mean? Yeah, completely. You know, so there is that. And if you don't have that visually striking thing, and of course he's got the scar tissue.
He's got that, that's true.
If you don't have that visually striking thing, you damn well better have some really killer backstory, you know?
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, 100% actually. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, no, I agree. I think it definitely adds to it, and it's just linking, like you say, it's linking into the whole history of the Russian and the Cold War and all of that, and it just adds that extra layer, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
So brilliant stuff. Okay, so following that, then we go to Bond's hotel. Now this is really cool. So basically, there's that hexagonal swimming pool, and it looks lovely. And he's just like floating in it. He does a little swim, and then he's just floating on his back. And basically, we see as the audience someone walking in with the dressing gown. I don't know if we notice Xenia straight away, but we see someone walking in, and then Brosnan is just sort of chilling there. Bond is just chilling there, and he sort of looks to the side and sees this sort of steam coming out, and he's like, that wasn't there a moment before. And then as he gets out of the pool and walks along, he knows where Xenia is hiding. Yeah, grabs her, like hauls her into the sauna, and that's so good, isn't it?
What I love about that so much is just how sort of blasé the way he sort of does it. He's not even he's not even trying. He's so relaxed. No. He's just like, come on, that's like child's play. What the hell are you playing at? You know what I mean? Yeah. And just throws her in there. Yeah. I love this scene, man. I think it's brilliant. Xenia is brilliant in this. Bond is brilliant in it, and I love. This is one of those actually where if you look close enough, the way it's filmed, it's the whole stuntman thing. So anytime there's, you know, obviously that thing where he literally throws her over his head straight to the floor, like there's some key points there where it's a stuntman or stunt people, I should say. Yeah. And it's filmed in such a way that it's so blink and you miss it, but you can see their faces. But it's done so well, and the editing is so tight that you just don't notice. You know what I mean? It's like what you were saying at the beginning. So that's something to look out for in this one.
If you can freeze frame everyone, and the person who is doubling Bond in this particular scene might have also doubled him for the bungee jump at the start.
Oh, really? Is that the dude?
And various other places in this film as well. Yeah, Wade Michaels. And for a bit more info, the woman who doubled Xenia her name is Eunice Huthart.
I remember
Does that
Eunice.
name ring a bell?
Absolutely. I remember being in all the interviews back in the day, old Eunice.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, following Gladiators TV show, Gladiators was brilliant. I used to love that show so much, man.
Me too, man. That Travelator at the end. Oh, Jet, mate. She came to my school once. It was
what?
God, yeah, Jet. I tell you what, Jet was a big feature of my teenage years. She was just
completely.
Yeah.
I think Lightning wasn't too bad.
Lightning was my second favourite.
Was it? That's so quality. That is brilliant. That is so good. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Okay, so following Gladiators. This is a good bit, isn't it? Because it's like, you don't need the gun commander, and then we get that killer line from Brosnan.
In it, that's a trailer moment, isn't it? That depends on your definition of safe sex, which again was a talking point at the time. Some people might say, "Oh, it's just a silly line," but no. Let's take it in the context of 1995. It's kind of like there was that whole thing in the 80s, wasn't there, with Bond practicing safe sex, because AIDS was all the rage back in those days, wasn't it? It was like, you got to promote
all the rage back in those days.
It was very popular. And all the rest of it. It's like, 90s man now. Obviously, the way as well, they're like we said a bit last time, like they're dressing Natalia down. She's not that typical boobs out kind of Bond girl. You know what I mean? She's got ratty old cardigan on. She wears that costume through most of the film. So it's kind of like, it is that side of things that, as much of a Lothario as Bond is in this film, there is that kind of side of things as well. So I feel like that's just a nod to the times as well as a cool line to say,
Definitely. But there are a couple of things about this scene. Again, Brosnan looks the business in this. He looks so good. He really does. And there's that whole bit where they start kissing and she bites his lip and he just sort of, sees a bit of blood on his fingers, and then she goes crazy, jumps at him, like wraps her legs around him, squeezes him, and he's trying to like slam her against a sauna wall to get her off, and she's loving it, man. She's absolutely loving it. And it's just a really, really good sort of fight. And it gets to that point where he puts her on the sort of hot coals on the heater or whatever it is, so she burns her butt. And then he has the water bucket that he knocks out this other dude.
Who is that other dude? That's my question.
Well, this is it. It's some random. We never see him again. He walks in there and he gets knocked out straight away. And then he sort of chucks her over his shoulder and stuff. But it's a great little scene that. And then again, killer line at the end.
No more foreplay. Take me to Yanis. I love it, man. Yeah,
with that little click beforehand when he arms a gun.
It's great.
It's so good though.
It's one of those things where this version of Bond he's not the Timothy Dalton License to Kill Bond where he's covered in blood and fucked up beyond belief at the end. This is the sort of Bond where you can put him through a meat cleaver dispenser. I don't know what a meat cleaver dispenser is, but you know what I'm saying. One of those big machines that mangles
minces, shall we say.
Yeah, that'll do me.
Okay.
And the hair is just not out of place at all. And I have, as funny and silly as that is, I have a big appreciation for it, man. It brings a smile to my face. I just love how he can do something like that and look infinitely cool a second later. I do appreciate that.
He rocks it, man. He rocks it, definitely. Okay, so following this, we're going to a scene aforementioned about the statue guard. Now, this is an interesting one. So he rocks up in the car with Xenia to start with, and basically like, oh no, the pleasure was all mine. Gives her a sort of a Roger Moore Bond judo chop on the back of the head and knocks her out for a bit, which I think is quite cool. Was it Sweet Dreams, do you say, or something like that? I think so. He had a nice little sort of line after that, didn't he? Yeah. So then basically he gets out and I'm really contradicted in this scene because visually I think it's a really interesting scene. So it's obviously it's quite dark, it's at night and everything. You've got these sort of the odd little light coming out, and then you've got all these statues of these fallen sort of past Russian greats sort of broken and all over the floor, which from a visual point of view is brilliant. And he's going along And then suddenly he hears, obviously, Trevelyan. And it's, I think the appearance of Trevelyan is quite similar to Renard when he comes out of the rock sort of area in
do you know what's interesting about that? Martin Campbell says he nicked it from The Third Man.
Oh, okay.
Which I've never actually watched, but
which
that's
John
a big
Glenn
influence.
worked on The Third Man back
Did
in
he
the day.
really?
Yeah, and Guy Hamilton, I think.
So I know that film was an influence on Living Daylights as well, wasn't it? Because I think they go to Prater Park in Third Man, which that's a film that's been on my to-do list for a long time, and I've never actually watched it. But
I've never seen it either, actually.
There was also another one that popped into my mind, is the at the very beginning, when Bond first meets Trevelyan in the pre-title sequence, you know, where Trevelyan's totally in shadow and he walks into the light. He said he borrowed that from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Apparently there's a scene in there where that happens as well. Yeah.
That's good. I like all these little sort of nods to past films when it's done nice. Sort of subtly and done well, which it obviously is here. So we get this scene and he's like, "Hello, James," and obviously he sort of reveals himself. Now he's got the burned face and he sort of says, obviously, Bond was to blame, setting the timers at 3 minutes instead of 6 and all that. Yeah. Now, I think the byplay between the two is great, and I think the backdrop is interesting. But something that I cannot effing stand is the music cue that's used here. It is so stupid. It doesn't work. It doesn't elevate the scene in any way. It distracts from the scene, and it is fucking awful, excuse my language. I really hate it. You know, and I know you don't like Ladies First and all the soundtrack, but this is the one that, like, some of the music I don't mind for Goldeneye, some of it I actually quite like, but it's this soundtrack that grates on me, Tom. It really does, and I just want to take it, rip out the notes, and just like shove them away because I fucking hate it. But anyway,
well, you'll be surprised that I
don't say you like it.
I absolutely agree with you. No, I do. There's one scene.
It's the worst music cue in the whole series. I think. I really do.
For me, that is Ladies First. I think is my worst in the whole series. But there's a scene coming up which is obviously the tank chase where John Altman scored that, obviously, and you've got more of a traditional orchestral Bond theme. And that to me is the only piece in this whole movie worth listening to. I mean, that is what we wanted. We just needed that through the whole thing. For me, it just seems to, like you say, that particular cue in this particular scene just doesn't seem to go. It's like he's just off on a tangent, scoring a completely different scene. You know, it just doesn't seem to work. And whenever I hear those monkey drums doing the Bond theme, I've got the ump immediately. Dun, 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 dun. No, it's not how you do it. You know what I mean? Give me some twangy guitars or some strings and bugger off.
Yeah. But okay, so music aside, I think it's quite an interesting sort of a thing. Obviously, they talk about Trevelyan being a Cossack and he basically tells Bond, you know, MI6 knew I was, but they thought I was too young to remember and all of that. So that's sort of brought up again, which is quite good. And then we get a mention of Bond's parents. So Trevelyan says, you know, your parents had the luxury
of dying in a climax.
Luxury, that's it. The luxury, that was the word I was thinking of. Yeah. So that's interesting, isn't it?
That is, obviously. Because I tell you why, we get that every 5 minutes at the moment, don't we? Daniel's Bond is very, you know, which
doesn't make it as special, Tom, does it?
No, it's you know what I love the most is like in License to Kill, where you get that subtle reference to Tracy. Well, it's not subtle even, but it's just that little nod to her of, you know, he was married once, but it was a long time ago, you know. And anybody who's, you know, any 13-year-old who was watching License to Kill in 1989, well, they'd have had to have been 15, wouldn't they, in 1989? You know, they probably had to go away and do a bit of research about what that line meant. You know what I mean? And that's lovely. I don't like to be spoon-fed everything. No. And this is a nice little, just a little subtle nod. Like nowadays, every time it's like, oh, parents this, parents that, Bond, you know, orphan. You know what I mean? Yeah, and you can't overdo that stuff because then he ends up being like an angsty teenager, doesn't he? You know?
Exactly, yeah. And hopefully we won't see it for a
very long time
to come. For a very long time, hopefully, yeah. Also, we find out why Trevelyan's sort of pseudonym is Janus. Obviously, the Roman two-faced god, and as he is the two sides of his face physically, but he's also the two-faced because he's sort of double crossing MI6. So again, that's quite a nice little bit there, isn't it? And there's that bit where Bond gets out his gun and Trevelyan is like, oh, James, it's idiotic to think that I can imagine your every move sort of thing, or something along those lines, isn't it? And Bond basically goes to shoot him and obviously gets hit by a tranquilizer dart and then goes out. So aside from the music, I think it's quite a cool little thing. Obviously, when Bond first sees him, he's like, he thought Trevelyan was dead and he'd been blaming himself all this time. And yet here he is. And obviously he turns out to be sort of his arch enemy in this one. Yeah. So I do like it. It's just the music.
I'd say it's a very visually striking scene, that one, with all those sort of old statues all broken up and left in this kind of sort of disused kind of garden of old statues. Yeah. And obviously, like we were saying,
it's based on a real location as well.
Yeah, I know there's one in Budapest as well, where they have all the old Soviet statues. I imagine there's probably quite a few dotted around in those ex-Soviet countries. But again, it ties in very well with the overall theme of things. You know what I mean? It's like there is that underlying thing of the Cold War being over now. And they've kind of embraced it, haven't they? Because there is that question, is Bond relevant? You can imagine all the fucking newspaper stories back in 94 or 95 would have been like, oh, Bond's finished, it's over, there's no Cold War anymore, blah, blah, blah. Little did they know what will be going on 20 years later. But there's all that kind of stuff. And to actually sort of embrace that flavour and have it right there on the screen of like being in the remains of the Soviet Union right there, talking about Lienz Cossacks and all that kind of stuff. It's good. I like it.
I think it's not the only thing they could have done, because they could have done something else, but it might not have worked. But I think it was the best idea to go with, is to completely immerse themselves within that whole sort of, because the question were there, a Cold War don't need Bond, but by putting him in it, you're answering those questions straight away, aren't you? Yeah. And so I think kudos to the screenwriters and Eon and stuff for going down that path. And and obviously we hadn't had that sort of type of thing before in terms of such a global political change within those times.
Well,
sort of thing.
When you think about it, I mean, the Cold War is obviously the garden in which a character like Bond grows, because when you think about what happened post World War II, Berlin Wall goes up, you got East Germany, West Germany.
Yeah, you think From Russia with Love, you think like
exactly,
even Octopussy,
completely.
You're thinking all these sort of films.
That was going on for decades, literally the fallout of World War II, going up through the 80s. I mean, you only got to watch Rocky IV, is it?
Three where he's against the Russian army.
You're thinking of Rambo, aren't you?
Oh, I am thinking of Rambo. Yeah,
Rocky.
4. Sorry,
What's the one with
4's
Dolph
against Dolph Lundgren. Yeah, that is 4. Yeah, sorry, my bad. I'm thinking
you
of
watch
Rambo.
any of those action movies from the 80s, and it was always the Soviets and the Russians who were the baddies, weren't they? They were the villains of that period, And it's
Living Daylights as well.
Living Daylights as well. There you go. Yeah. So it's great that is echoing what was actually happening in the world at that time. The first, when you consider, it's a valid question: is there a need for Bond anymore after that finishes, after the fall of the Soviet Union, who were the baddies of those days? What is there left for Bond to do? So it's great that they just embraced that and stuck him right in the middle of the aftermath of all that. It's good, good move. Definitely.
Good stuff. Okay, so next time, Bond next time we see him, he kind of comes to while Natalia is screaming at him, wake up, wake up, wake up. And basically they're trapped in the almost cabin of the Tiger helicopter, aren't they?
They are.
And so basically, the rockets have been set to launch, and they just fire off as Bond wakes up. And I like the way that they cross over each other, very much like The Spy Who Loved Me. And then they realise, oh shit, we're the target, it's heading back for us. And obviously his hands are tied, there's not much he can do, so he headbutts the controls, which starts the sort of propellers and stuff, and then he sees that eject button and he starts headbutting that.
He fully commits, doesn't he, to his headbutt? He's not shy to get stuck in.
I'm impressed, I really am. And there's something that I'm going to mention about, which will probably be in the next episode. But there were a lot of headbutts in this film, particularly the uncensored version, but we'll go into that sort of later on. So anyway, obviously he managed to hit the eject button. That whole sort of cabin thing rises up just as the bombs sort of explode the Tiger helicopter. Yeah. Double parachute comes out and then they float back down. What do you think about this particular scene?
It's nice little. It's nice. It's what I deem is like a classic. Again, a classic. Bond villain is going to kill you thing. It's the slow
How is he
moving
gonna
dipping
get out of
mechanism
it?
from Austin Powers and the sharks with laser beams. You know, he didn't have to dart him in the neck to just then stick him in a helicopter to kill him. He could have just shot him in the face. But this is the world of Bond. This is the world of classic Bond. So you don't do that. You put him in a situation he can escape from in order for a bit of excitement. And that's what this scene is, I think.
Yeah, completely. It really is. And so basically when they sort of parachute back down, he gets out, he helps Natalia out, and she goes and kicks him in the shin. I was like, well, you know, she's been screaming at him to wake up so he can do something. He wakes up, he headbutts the controls and the eject button to save them, and then she sort of thanks him by giving him a whack in the shin.
A little bit ungrateful, wasn't it, from Natalia, bless her heart. I put that down to she's just overwhelmed and exhausted by what's happened. She doesn't even know what's going on half the time, I think.
No, and she doesn't know who he is either, does she?
That's true.
She doesn't know who he is. So yeah, who knows? So basically, she goes to run, Bond goes to grab her, and then all these jeeps turn up, don't they? With like lights on them. Russian soldiers get out with machine guns. And now next up, we see they're in the interrogation sort of room with Dmitry Mishkin. Now, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yes. Now, this is cool because obviously you get the first little bit where Bond and Natalia are in the room on their own, and we get a little bit of a bit of information. Bond's learning some stuff here that we already knew, having seen the earlier part of the film, but Bond obviously didn't yet. She fills him in on, Boris and Arumov coming in and stealing the satellite, blah, 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 and all the rest of it.
Your watch has.
There you go.
7-eye blast.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was very well spotted of him. And all the rest of it. So that's nice. We pushed the story forward a little bit. Obviously in comes Mishkin. Which a bit of back and forth there, and I like how Bond handles himself in this situation. He's like, looking him right in the eyes, giving as good as he gets. They get a little bit out of hand. We get a classic trailer moment line from Natalia, don't we? Which is,
"Oh, stop it, both of you! You're like boys with toys." Indeed,
that was beautiful. I like that. That was really nice. It was really cool. Really nicely done. So it's cool. And then obviously there's a moment here where Arumov storms in, and we forget that this is the first time Bond sees Arumov like outside of the pre-title sequence, isn't it?
That's true.
It's,
That's
he's
very
seen him
true,
9 years previous. We've had that little hint about it in M's office where he comes up on the screen and
they've made him a general,
exactly, and an old friend of yours, I understand, and all that stuff. And then here he is in the flesh, and you can see Bond's face is like, holy shit, there's a Arumov right there, and so there's that personal kind of level of things comes into play as well, and you can just see it on his face when he comes in. What do you think?
I like the fact that Bond and Natalia, basically Bond says, I know I'm betting you're the one that climbed out of the dish, and so he's kind of given away that he's a man that's got a bit of knowledge behind it, so they're kind of sussing each other out. And when he sort of says the thing about the watch and asks her, okay, who's behind it, and she doesn't mention Oromov at first at all. She says Boris Grishenko, he's the man behind it, so she hasn't given up Oromov at all initially. Then Mishkin comes in, and we get that byplay between him and Bond, and so Mishkin thinks Bond has stolen the Goldeneye. Bond assumes that Mishkin has done it, and so there's that nice sort of thing where they're sort of arguing, the lost art of interrogation, Mr. Bond, and all of that sort of stuff, which is brilliant. And so it gets to that point where they're obviously, it's a bit schoolboyish in terms of like the arguments going back and forth, until Natalia then says, okay, it was Oromov. He's killed everyone, stole the Goldeneye, and straight away, Mishkin is like, right, okay, so there's the answer. And then he had to go at Bond. You were talking about the lost art of interrogation, Mr. Bond. And, so he's happy now. He's done his business. He's got the answer he wants. But then Oromov rocks up, and Mishkin's like, from what I hear, it is you who is out of order, and all that sort of stuff. And then basically, Mishkin's worried that Oromov will do something, so he gets to tell a guard, and then Oromov shoots a guard, and then shoots Mishkin as well, doesn't he? Yeah. And then there's that whole weird thing where Oromov takes the bullets out of the gun, but then gives the PPK back to Bond, doesn't he?
I don't quite know why he does that. Oh no, I know why he does that, because because Bond
would have killed
he's the one responsible for shooting Mishkin. He
yeah,
reveals
exactly.
his entire plan of what he's going to say.
It's a real
right
exposition bit, isn't it? Yeah, it's like he's always
British
talking to
agent
himself.
Shoots Dmitry Mishkin whilst trying to escape. Yes, he's got it.
He's like,
gives him the gun. Away we go. But
it's such a good scene. That it's like it's almost laughable, but it does work. It is funny.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now,
their agent James Bond.
After this moment, obviously, we get a little bit of soldiers start pouring in the door.
Yes.
Bit of hand to hand.
Very much like the computer game. This bit, isn't it?
I was just going to say,
the shooting and the corridors
like stepping
and all that sort of
into
stuff.
the Nintendo 64 and going through that. I would say that is the level of the archive, wasn't it? That's what it was called on the N64.
Yes,
that is the one level I think is the signature level of that game, and that's obviously this scene.
Yeah.
Now this is.
Mate, I've just had. Okay, go on.
Go on. No, go on. That sounded
very
exciting.
quickly. I just had an amazing idea.
Go on.
So the equivalent of like you've got your laser quests and all stuff like that. What if you had actual Goldeneye levels that you could go up and dress in, and you had sort of weapons,
that would be
like
cool.
whether it's Laser Quest or something like that, but you could dress up as your soldiers or your Bond characters, and you'd have a remake of that stairwell, the corridor, or even the actual computer game lessons where you're going around trying to kill. How amazing would that be?
That would be amazing. I tell you what, man, I will predict with the old Oculus Rift and all that kind of stuff that's around these days, give that a few more years, some dude is going to recreate GoldenEye in that world.
Definitely.
So that's only a matter of time, dude. When that gets that good, I do worry that most of the human race will just disappear into that and never.
When it's like Ready Player One, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
Oasis, just log on and see you in a couple of weeks or something.
Indeed, yeah. But so good action sequence. Again, very classic.
Definitely.
There's lots of running around with bullets tinging and tanging everywhere, I do like that sound effect that you get when bullets miss you and it like ricochets and it goes pow! That sound? Oh, yeah, we get a lot of that.
I know exactly what you mean.
I always like to listen out for those, and there's a lot of them in this scene.
Yeah, weirdly, I really like the sound in this particular scene of the stomping boots. I don't know why. There's that part where there's a really good bit actually. So they're doing the shooting, and Natalia kind of grabs Bond and spins him around, and then he shoots down there, and they end up in the sort of archives, don't they?
Yeah.
And as they're going along, you just hear all the sort of soldiers rock up. I don't know what it is. It just sounds pretty cool.
Just pleasing to you, like the dice in Octopussy and the little dice holder.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? It's funny, isn't it? Little sounds like that, but they sound so good, and it's hard to. Why? What makes a sound good?
I don't know. It's just
so
pleasing,
strange.
isn't
Is it subjective? It must be, but it's just a strange phenomenon almost. But anyway, so they end up in the archives, and Bond basically tips that big load of shelves, doesn't he? So they knock into each other, which end up against the door, so Urmov and the others can't get in. So they're basically. That's it. Bond glances out the window, sees the tanks, and they're going and trying to hide as all the guards come in. But then Natalia knocks over one of the books, and so they hear them, and there's lots of guns firing and stuff like that. And it gets to the point where she kind of falls through the floor, and one of the soldiers catches her. So it's just Bond by himself, and he rocks out the belt, fires a piton, and then we get that classic sort of swing, kicks the soldier off, and you get that amazing shot from the outside where Bond crashes through the window, and there's all the gunfire behind it, and he sort of lands on top of the vehicle and stuff, and that is just a brilliant moment, that whole bit.
Do you know what? I think it's a stroke of luck that Natalia gets captured, because obviously Q said it's got enough that belt has got enough to carry one person on it. Like and as he's getting the belt ready, he's like, "Trust me," when they're hiding, and it could very well have been they would have started the swing. The weight would have been too much. They fall down, and that's it. Game over. Yeah. So it's almost lucky that she got captured there, because it allows Bond to escape. But So that takes us to what I would say was the big trailer moment for GoldenEye. This was a very signature thing. You'd see that all the time. That shot of the car burning around the corner and the wall, and then all of a sudden the wall exploding with the tank coming through. Now,
mate,
let's just talk about that for a moment, right?
Yeah.
That is obviously what I would call like heightened reality. That's not your sort. If you're going to make a a Casino Royale where you're like, let's go back to basics and let's do the realism thing close to Fleming, you probably wouldn't do a scene like this, because this is more Roger than it is Daniel, isn't it? Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah. I definitely, particularly when he does the scenes where he's sort of doing his tie and a few other things, and some of the looks that he gives and stuff like that. Yeah, 100%.
However, I also think it's brilliant. It's one of those things where there's a balance involved, because you do have to suspend your disbelief a little bit with this one, because obviously I don't think a tank would be capable of going quite as fast as it's portrayed to be through the streets. Do you know what I mean?
45 miles an hour, I think it was. No, 40 miles an hour they got up to ram through that wall.
Is that so? So, because it feels like it's bombing along the streets when I watch that sequence. So I don't know whether was that sped up a smidgen, or is that what 45 miles an hour looks like?
It's all done for real. They amended certain things. So when they were actually filming in St. Petersburg, they changed to rubber tracks so they wouldn't damage the road. Right. But in terms of sort of the power slides and stuff like that, that was all done for real.
Well, I'll shut my mouth then.
Was driving that.
I thought it was a case of like the DB5 being able to keep up with the Ferrari. I thought it was one of those jobbies, but obviously not. All right, I've learned something today. I tell you what, as well, that which I didn't realise, and it's funny to imagine it when you watch this sequence, is that whole bit with as it bursts through the wall was they had to time it so right, and they took 5 attempts to get that right before they actually burst through the wall, because the timing just wasn't quite there each time, and then the last time they got it, and it had to have a 1 mile run up in order to be fast enough to break through the wall. So it's like for a whole mile before they did it, and that's obviously why they had tricky with the timing. But it's interesting to imagine it on the other side of that shot, on the other side of the wall, getting a massive run up.
I mean, for me, this is probably one of the best scenes in the film. Obviously, the best action scene in the film, I think, or it's got to be right up there. And again, we mentioned the music earlier. Great bit of music that accompanies this scene. Really, really good. We hear the Bond theme sort of proper, as it is. But we got a tank, so we've got a massive vehicle that we see being power slid and all that sort of thing. But I love the bit, it's quite early on. So you got Urumov in his little car with Natalia and the drivers and stuff, and he's having the old swig of whiskey from his hip flask, isn't he? And there's a bit where they just they sort of do a J-turn, go down this little alleyway, and then, a tank can't follow us down an alleyway. Yeah. What does Bond do? Fucking turns a tank into the buildings. It's like you got a tank driving through buildings, solid buildings, like going all the way through. And it's not just one or two, Tommy. It's like a whole stack of them. Yeah. And it just looks so bloody good, doesn't it? It looks incredible, that scene. I love it. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, it's a belter. It's one of those things where Bond needs to be the person that does a scene like that. Do you know what I mean? It feels to me, with this style of Bond, it feels right, and like I say, it's an ultimate trailer moment, but it's good. Definitely. You get the old straightening of the tie as well afterwards, don't you? When a little bit later on when he crashes the cars, it's nice.
Yeah, it's cool. So you get quite a lot of good action here. So you get the jeeps flying and the people going in the river, and there's that bit where Urumov's like, use a bumper, that's what it's for, to drive and sort of put people out of the way. Obviously, you get the tank driving over the police cars and all that sort of stuff, which is cool. And then you get that other bit where there's that the Perrier lorry
nice
full of
little
Perrier
bit of product
cans, slams through that.
Do you know what?
Certainly, but that's kind of in a cool way, isn't it?
Do you want to know an interesting fact about that?
I certainly do. Yes, please.
Do you know they went to Coca-Cola and Pepsi first and said, "Listen, we've got this scene. Do you want to do it?" And they both said no.
Wow. Okay. Did they give any reason as to why?
I don't know. I don't know what the reason was, but they said, "No, not up for it, mate." And then that was it. Yeah. So obviously Perrier stepped in and said, "Yeah, let's do it." So I remember that was a big talking point back in the day as well.
Wow. Okay.
It was that I remember that being on the news that there was a big Perrier truck involved.
But you know what? For some reason, that makes it like the Perrier truck. If it had been Coca-Cola or Pepsi, to me, that's almost It really 100% it would have cheapened them because they're such global brands and recognisable, and also there's something about the colour of the Perrier. Obviously, the green almost blends in a bit, and it's not like your bright colours or whatever, the red and blue and stuff. But because it's not as a big a brand as the other two, it doesn't seem quite as in your face, even though it's obviously that scene.
A classier vibe to it as well, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's a bit French sounding, so you're like, hello, I'll have a bit of Perrier.
Yeah. And a bit more that if Bond was going to drink out of a can, he'd definitely go Perrier over Coke or Pepsi, wouldn't he?
He certainly
You'd
would.
imagine.
Yeah, he certainly would.
So it's a lot more fitting, I think, that particular bit, which is good. So and then we get that crazy bit where the tank basically drives into that statue, doesn't it? So there's like Tsar Nicholas on the winged horse with a sword, and it's just resting on top of the tank as he's driving along. Which it just that is just such. I don't know if you could use the word iconic, but it is an ultimate Bond sort of look, isn't it?
Perfect
a tank
timing, isn't it?
with a massive statue on its roof. Yeah, it just looks so good. And he basically drives up to that bridge, and you see the sort of horse's head come in the window, and then just drop down on the couple of police cars and stuff like that, which is superb. Yeah,
it is a belter of a sequence. That it really is. Yeah, it's nicely done. Yeah, absolutely. So I think that about wraps up today's coverage of Goldeneye, isn't it? I think we're going to press pause there before we continue with the final third of the film next time. But so answer me this, Chris.
Yes.
How do you feel about the middle section of Goldeneye? Do you feel like it lost your attention? Did you feel like it dipped in quality any? Or was it guns blazing all the way?
You know what? Surprisingly, I was expecting myself to have a bit of a dip, but I don't think I did. Just going through the scenes, like a couple of the St. Petersburg ones, the Q Lab scene, absolutely fantastic. The interesting scenes with Wade and then Zhukovsky, a bit different but interesting. I really like that hotel scene with Bond and Xenia. Yeah. I think that's fantastic. The only blip that I would say, which I mentioned earlier, is that statue garden scene with Bond and Trevelyan. The scene itself is not too bad, but it's the music. It just throws me. I can't live with it. I don't know why.
Well, do you know what I think? As I look through the list of scenes we've talked about today, there's very little fat in there. There's very little stuff that you would want to get rid of. Like, let's just quickly sort of go through it. The very, very beginning with that brief scene where Arumov and Mishkin are chatting.
Great, love it.
That's fine. Just kind of pushes the story forward a bit. It's very brief anyway. You got the Q Lab scene, which is
brilliant, absolutely
perfect. Couldn't get any better. That's great. You got the whole Jack Wade meeting in St. Petersburg, going to Zhukovsky, which is very light-hearted and very comedy, but great. Some great dialogue in there. That's great. Zhukovsky spa and stuff.
More good dialogue.
Yeah, you got the whole spa, sauna, steam room kind of thing. Great fight sequence. Again, pushes it forward. You got the statue garden. That's obviously a massive reveal, the statue garden. So it's in there. I totally understand what you mean about the music. I suppose the only thing you could have cut out is the whole sequence with the helicopter, like with the whole sort of the rockets turning back on itself and blowing up, because you could have just had the dart to the neck and then bang, he wakes up with with Nutella. I nearly said wakes up with a jar of Nutella. He's like, why not? You could have had them waking up in custody, but it's a nice bit of action. It's not like the fire engine. Does that go? I like that. That's nice. Yeah. It's not like the fire engine chasing a View to a Kill, where it's like a long sequence just for the sake of having an action sequence. It's short enough that it's like a little bit of excitement there.
And so I don't think you'd want to get rid of it. And also, it's from a story plot point of view, you're blowing up the tiger, so you know that can't be used again. Yeah. So that in itself is a useful sort of thing for the audience to know and understand.
Absolutely. And then you've obviously, you move on. You got the interrogation scene. We've got things pushing forward now. Bond's learned some stuff. Great gunfight. You got the tank chase. So there's the only reason I say that about the Tiger helicopter is that it's. You didn't perhaps need it to push the story forward, but like you say, there's some useful things about it. You know what I mean? So I'd say very little fat there. It moves the story along nicely, very entertaining as we go. I'm still very happy, Chris. Whether that remains into part 3 remains to be seen. We'll have to find out next week.
This is it. We certainly will. I think I'm right. I'm right with you on that one there. Absolutely banging. So that's 2/3 of the film, which we're exceedingly happy with. And again, Brosnan looks a business, really great throughout, like from what we've seen so far. Yeah, roll on part 3 next week.
What a geezer. All right, good stuff. So then, Chris, we should revisit our trivia question of the day, wasn't it? Which came in from Daniel McGinley. So let's have another quick listen to that and we will have a discussion.
So if you both were to join Spectre, in which department would you work and why? Counterintelligence, terrorism, revenge, or extortion?
All right. So that's a very good question. That's a food for thoughter, as I like
it
to
is,
call
and it's definitely not one we've had either before.
No,
so that's
good question. Nice one. So go on, then you go first, Chris.
Yes.
What are you thinking?
Okay.
Because you did say there was an extra level to that you wanted to reveal later. So talk to me.
Which I'll come back to in a minute. So let's look at the different departments. Well, counterintelligence is basically kind of what Bond does. Like, obviously, he does a bit more to it, but part of the role of the spy is counterintelligence, feeding false information to your enemy or your opposition. So I think if you were going to choose one and you wanted to be the most like Bond, that'd be the one that you'd go for, I think, is counterintelligence. Although saying that, in Dr. No, if you remember, Bond was like, he'd preferred the revenge department because he wanted to find out the man who killed Strangways and Quarrel. Yeah. And so he was keen on that particular department. I don't think I'd be down for terrorism. There's enough of that in the world at the moment. I think I'd happily leave terrorism to one side.
Yeah, I'll give you that.
But I think the one that's kind of flicking my switch a little bit could be extortion, Tom.
Oh, really? There's a little bit of dark side of Chris Wright coming out there. Talk to me about that.
Well, you're just trying to get... You can have some pretty inventive ways of how to extort money from people.
I suppose there'd be a lot of fun in that if they were bad people that you were extorting.
Clearly there could be
some entertainment value to be had out of that side of things.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah,
I think sorry, go on. Yeah,
I was going to say I can't even say it now. Special executive for counterintelligence, terrorism, revenge, and extortion. Yeah. I think for me, it would all depend on the people I was up against, right? Because, like you say, the revenge department, if you're going up against the Nazis, that would be a nice job to have. You could get some job satisfaction out of that.
All of them?
All of them, yeah, absolutely. You get some job satisfaction out of that, wouldn't you? If it's a bad group of people, obviously, terrorism's a bit of a dodgy subject in this day and age because it is what it is, and you wouldn't want to get involved with that. Counterintelligence, I think there's going to be a lot of spying in there, and I think there's some entertainment value to be had from the extortion because I imagine what that would be, Chris. There'd be a lot of From Russia with Love, behind the mirror, filming some shenanigans that you could blackmail people with,
indeed.
And I feel like I'd be quite good at that myself, actually.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we sign up, are we both going for extortion or one in counterintelligence, one extortion, and then we'll switch after like a year or two?
I think I'm going to go with you, man. We can be like the Winton kid of the extortion side of things.
Okay, let's do it.
Very nice.
Okay, that's good. Yeah. We'll look into that then. If we have we got the number, by the way?
No, I think Daniel left it in an email, so we'll drop him a line after today's episode and we'll see if we can make it happen. Yeah,
get on to Ernst. I'm sure he'd be up for it. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Nice. Okay, so extortion is the other thing that I was going to say, which is if you happen to work for Spectre as potentially a minion, what would your job be? So, for instance, in You Only Live Twice, you've got the guys in white, the guys in yellow, the guys in red, and all that sort of stuff. Would you be a minion, or would you? I guess if you're doing extortion or if you're doing counterintelligence, you've got to be a few levels above the minion level, haven't you? I think they're run-of-the-mill sort of everyday doers.
Yeah, you'd be like the executive level,
Yeah,
it's like when you go to McDonald's, you've got the people serving the burgers, but then you've got the one dude with the tie on that walks around bossing everybody around. I feel like it would be that step up from there.
That step up, okay. And that is a huge step up, really, if you're talking about it in that sort of vein of things.
So, cool. That's a good point. I do feel I suppose you'd need some kind of disfigurement or some kind of thing to really fit in, because you couldn't just be like a normal dude, could you? If you're going to work for the extortion department, like
that's true.
We'd need some scars, or we'd need some kind of maybe
we could get like these, maybe the future of CGI face sort of transplanting. You'll get you have laser pens. Yeah. Maybe you'll have a pen that you can shine and it creates a new face on someone else as they're walking along.
Yeah, that's. I could see old Ethan Hunt using one of those.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's
there
very
we go.
nice. I was thinking we'd need some sort of disfigurement, like both of us have our bollocks chopped off or something like that, and then we're like those weird dudes without the bollocks who go around extorting money out of people.
You'd need something, wouldn't you? But I guess did Wynton Kidd have any physical abnormality? I guess they looked weird. That's what you're going to go for.
They were very unusual looking dudes. Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
I think we'd be down for that. We'll get on the phone. Cool.
Absolutely.
Sounds good.
Now we'll pass the interview flying colours. Coolio, righty ho then, Chris. You know what it's time for now. It is time for the Guess the Quote round.
Bond, James Bond.
That's right. For any new listeners, the Guess the Quote round is where one of us performs a quote from one of the Bond films and the other person has to guess it. Now, it was my quote last time, wasn't it? I gave you a doozy, Chris. It must be said. I warned you. I said, Chris,
you did actually.
Be careful this week because this one is very difficult. You know,
okay.
And I wonder I'm going to rock it out again for you, and I want to quiz you before you try and answer because I want to see
I might
what
need
your
a couple of
process
goes,
was.
but we'll see. Okay, let's go.
Here we go. But there would be no need. Now talk to me. That rings a bell, doesn't it? I know that
definitely
rings a bell.
does. But there would be no need.
Shut up.
I think I got
Have
the
you got
film.
it? All right, go on.
I haven't got the character. Is the film Thunderball?
Well, I am very impressed. Yes, because it is Thunderball.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I know it's Thunderball, right? But there would be no need. Oh my God! I think I got it.
No,
sorry,
you
I got rather excited then.
Go on.
Is it? It is! I know it is. I'm so excited. Is it just after the title scene when when Emilio Largo is walking towards the Spectre meeting and he passes the dude that's part of the person, basically they're the International Brotherhood of Missing Persons or something like that, and they're talking about paying back the money. How would we pay back the money if you're going to help us? But there would be no need. Is it that?
No, it's not.
Oh fuck! What is it?
Yeah, it is really.
No,
Nice.
That is so good.
It's the state. Is it the International Brotherhood of Stateless Persons?
Persons. That's exactly it. Yeah, the
persons,
International Brotherhood of Stateless Persons. Yeah.
Well done. I thought I got you there, and you've just rocked it out of the park, man. Well done.
When you did it last time, I had Thunderball in my head, but I couldn't picture where, and it was only listeling to it the second time. That was awesome, man.
I'm very impressed. Good stuff.
That was a doozy as well.
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
Have you got one for me this week?
I have indeed. In fact, I had a couple and I wasn't sure which one to choose from, so I'm going to go with the one that I'm going to go with.
All right.
So are you ready?
I am.
My guess the quote this week is Fadilai, Osho Ciao.
Can I have that again, please?
Yeah, okay. So, here it is. Fadilai, Osho Ciao.
Damn, dude.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's in my upper crust English accent, so I hope
no, absolutely. Very well performed. I think by the very nature of this quote, it narrows it down somewhat, I think.
Yes.
But it doesn't jump out at me straight away.
No.
So, yeah.
No. It is a bit of a doozy as well, actually. I think I've repaid you the favour with this one. I think the other one I had in mind might have been a bit easier, but I'll give that to you next time. But there we go.
All right, cool. So we had a listener quote from Jamie Cunningham last time, didn't we?
We did indeed. So
my name is Jamie Cunningham, and this is my wife, Oprah.
Nice.
Guess the film. Anyway, so should we have a little reminder of what the quote was from Jamie?
Yeah, let's do it.
Inspired, sir.
Nice.
Right. I would say it's a very appropriate quote for, what might be coming up soon.
That's what you said last week.
Yes. I would say most people would probably get that one. I think so.
I think, even earlier we were discussing about Mickey G's cameos, and I think that's one of the ones where you see him. He's obviously got dialogue, couple of lines of dialogue, and we get a full-on bit of Mickey G in this one. So obviously, I think it's a Mickey G quote. Will you give me the film that you think it's from?
Tomorrow Never Dies.
Lovely. And do you know what his name is in it? There we go. There's a tricky one.
I spoke. If this had been an old school Bond film, he'd probably be number 3 or something, wouldn't he? But he's one of Carver's kind of goons, I suppose, on his little video conference call, which in '97, dude, that was the coolest thing in the world, having a video conference call and
a touch thing pad, a touch pad to bring everything else and all that.
And look at us right now rocking it over Skype. We take these things for granted, don't we, these days? But in '97, that was hot stuff.
There was no JBR podcast in 1997.
There wasn't, was there? There was barely even an internet.
Strange.
But
exactly.
There we go. So should we turn it over to Jamie, make sure we're right?
Yes. Just quickly, I think his name was Tom Wallace.
All right. Anyway, interesting. Yeah. Okay. Let's hear from Jamie then.
Hi, Tom and Chris. This is Jamie from Bristol calling you with the answer to my listener quote. The quote again, inspired, sir, is spoken by none other than Mickey G, Michael G. Wilson, in his cameo appearance in Tomorrow Never Dies. As one of Elliot Carver's men, he plays the guy instructed by Carver to blackmail the American president with a video of him in a hotel room with a Dallas cheerleader. Keep up the great work, guys. Doing an awesome job. Love listening to your podcast. Speak to you again soon. Bye.
Very nice too. Yes.
There we go. I tell you what, that is missing a little trick because on that particular scene, there's so many screens with each of his sort of his golden retrievers, as he calls them. I think one of those screens should have showed a clip of the president with the Dallas cheerleader. I think they could have easily had that nice. Just a little bit. One of the do you think or not?
Yeah,
they clearly had that sort of footage somewhere.
Yeah,
I've been told the footage is excellent.
I suppose that would have been Bill in those days, wouldn't it? In '97.
Yeah, yeah.
So I would not be surprised if there was indeed footage of him with the Dallas cheerleader.
It probably wasn't too long after old,
Monica, bless her heart. Yeah, indeed.
That's it.
So there's that, and I certainly wouldn't be surprised if the current US president had some sort of footage like that floating around either. That would not.
Yes.
That would not surprise anybody, I think, really.
No,
but there we go. Bond ahead of its time. All right then. So we have another listener quote, don't we? Who is this one from?
Yes, this new listener quote is from Steve from Northampton.
Let's have a listen.
Hey Tom and Chris, it's Steve from Northampton. Just thought I'd finally send you a quote, one I've been thinking of for a while. So here goes. Get lost. No, down the back. Okay, there we go. I will message back in a second with the answer to that one. Bye.
I know that, but I can't quite place it right now.
See, the get lost, it didn't do anything for me, but the other bit, the no round the back, that is definitely. I think I know who says it. I think I know who says it, well, but I don't know the context yet. But I think I know who says it. Oh, that's a good one.
I think it's from recent times.
Yes, I think you're right. I think you're right. But again, like another cracking quote there, superb. So we'll have a listen to that next week and see if we're right.
Yeah, all right.
Barking up the right tree. So
very nice. So, Chris, you know what it's time for now, don't you?
I do indeed. It's time for.
Who wrote the score for Live and Let Die? Who played Helga Brandt and how did she die? Who wants to stockpile the water in Bolivia? It's Tommy Trivia.
That's right, it's time for Tommy Trivia. This is where Chris breaks out the 007 Trivial Pursuit deck and quizzes me on the questions. Now, I've been doing all right lately, haven't I? I've been knocking the questions out.
Yeah, definitely you've been getting 100% like left, right and centre, I think. Okay, so we're going to start with, you're going to get this straight away, but it's okay. We're going to start with casting characters. Can you tell me, Tom, who plays Solitaire?
The wonderful, the beautiful, the amazing future investment that is Jane Seymour.
Yes, and I'm so glad you said that because I would have said exactly that line had you not said it. Okay, on to the films. Who delivers their only line of dialogue at the end of Moonraker?
That would be Jaws.
And for a bonus point, can you tell me what that line of dialogue is?
Well, here's to us.
That's amazing. Okay, brilliant stuff. On to 3, which is the vehicles. How does Scaramanga escape in his AMC Matador?
It is an AMC Matador plane car that grows wings.
It is indeed, yes. Yeah. It certainly is.
Well, it doesn't grow wings, does it? He's got like an attachment that he puts on the top. Yeah.
I think growing, probably wouldn't get that. But that's great. Okay, on to gadgets and weapons. What weapon is Jinx an expert with? So we are talking... Die another day here, Tom.
Driving a stake through my heart, Chris.
I think that might... Do you want me to check the answer?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind.
Do you know what? You're probably not far off. Do you want to... Okay. Do you want to go...
Ask me the question again.
Okay, what weapon is Jinx an expert with, and you're not allowed to say her mouth?
What is she an expert with?
I think what it's going to be is, if you think towards the end of the film, she uses certain things... within a fight. I don't know if that helps you.
Oh,
do you remember who she fights at the end of the film?
Isn't it the fencing thing?
Yeah. So Rosamund Pike was the fencer. Well, had the sword. Do you remember what? Well, at least I think that's what it's going for. Otherwise, I can't think what else. So it could be.
Rosamund had the sword, and Jinx had something else. Did she?
Yes.
It wasn't the sword then. Oh, mate, it's been 16 years, so I don't know.
Oh yeah. So if it is this, she had two, not mini swords. Obviously, they were like sort of knives or daggers. She had like two. So
is it like what Raphael had in the Ninja Turtles?
Yeah, and he had
they were
side daggers.
Size. Yeah, SAI. Yeah, he was my favourite turtle. Raphael. Yeah.
Everyone went for him. I think it was because he was the moody one. Do you know? Can you guess who my favourite was?
I would say Michelangelo.
Yes, it was. How did you know that?
How did you know as a Michelangelo kind of guy.
Totally. Yeah. For so many reasons. A, orange is my favourite colour. B, nunchuckers, dude. They are the best weapon going.
Do you
nunchuckers.
Know, when you fly into Singapore, they say over the speaker on the plane, they say that if you have nunchucks, you have to declare them.
Really? Yeah. Do you have to declare them in a display of expertship?
Maybe that's it. You've got to show your skills off. But no, amongst other things like, firearms need to be checked, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. They mentioned nunchucks specifically. So I thought that's interesting. There's got to be a thing then, if you're a Singapore.
I wonder how many they get going into the airport then. Indeed. So yeah, totally. Michelangelo, nunchucks, bit of a dude, and you're Raphael, the moody one. That's cool. But the side. Okay, so we digress slightly. What weapon? We're saying side daggers or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, it actually says knives, so it's kind of close enough. I'm going to give it to you.
Well, no, I don't deserve that because it wasn't until
you don't deserve that. You're right. Yeah, no, that is true. But you do still have your bonus point from the previous one, so you're on 3.5 out of 4.
All right. Nice.
Okay. 2 more to go. On to locations. What country is Christatos working with to retrieve the ATAC?
The Russians.
So the Russians. What were the Russians known as? Russia. What's another 4-letter acronym for the Russians? And actually, you could do this in 2 ways.
The USSR.
Yeah, the US. It's only say that because it's there, but I'll give you Russia. Cool. Finally, this is to make you 5.5 out of 6. Finally, crewing behind the scenes. In what year was On Her Majesty's Secret Service released?
Well, that would be my favourite number of all, Chris, which is obviously 69.
Yes, Tom. And why is that your favourite number, shall I ask?
I don't know. I just like it. It looks nice when you write it down.
Yes. Lovely jubbly. So there you go. 5.5 out of 6, man. Superb.
Beautiful. Didn't do too bad there.
Yes.
I feel like it's understandable that I didn't get the Die Another Day question right. So, I think so I feel like I'm forgiven by the JBR Massive. Yeah. Righty-ho then, Chris. It's time for the final game of the day, which is obviously... It's the music cue. That's right. It's time for Guess the Music Cue. Now, you haven't given us a quote last time, have you? It was a cue. Sorry. It's the cue and the quote. I get mixed up. I'm not very clever, you see, so things like that happen to me very easily. It wasn't you that sent in the quote last time, was it? It was somebody else.
No,
who was it?
It was a fellow Chris. His name is Chris Hayes, and this is the quote. You got me doing it now. And this is a music cue that Chris sent in. Let's have a listen. There we are. What do we think?
That's a tough one, mate. I'm not sure about that at all, actually. I'm going to go out of the gate and I'm going to say, is it Never Say Never Again?
No, it's not. But that is it. That is an interesting guess. That is a good guess. First of all, brilliant job, Chris. I think it's a great music cue. If I'm going to try and point you in the right direction,
all right.
So I'm gonna say Roger. I'm gonna say early-ish Roger, and I'm gonna say big ass film.
That's got to be Spy Love Me, then, isn't it?
I believe it is. Is that now? You got to think tension. You got to think suspense. You got to think.
Is it sort of near about when Jaws is in the shadow and
no,
Fekesh is running away?
I tell you what. See if this gives it away. Does that give it away?
See, that makes me think of The Man with the Golden Gun.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. It's not as pronounced as that. It's more someone that's a bit nervous when they do it. And this is great for anyone listening. By the way, I just gulped.
No, I'm bollocks.
Okay, I think it is from in the Laparis where he tries to take the detonator just before he takes the detonator out of the nuclear missile. I think it's in the build up to that in that particular scene.
Very nice. All right. Do we have any kind of answer from Chris Hayes, or is that, or are we just going with that?
I don't know if I don't know if he sent an answer or not.
All right, let's put that out to Chris Hayes. Tell us what the answer is, and
he might have sent an answer. If he has, I'm sorry.
We will reveal it next time. This is the level of professionalism everyone's dealing with JBR.
Exactly.
What's the answer? I don't know. I think it's that. Lovely, nice one. Yes, Mr. Hayes, if you wouldn't mind, let us know whether Chris got that right or not.
Yes,
so you've got a new one for us this week, haven't you?
I do. Yeah, back to me for the music cue this week. Now, this one, I think you'll have a decent chance of getting. I think.
All right.
But anyway, let's have a listen and see what you think.
Let's do it. Oh, all right. That's an interesting one.
Cool.
It doesn't immediately jump out to me, but I feel like there are some clues within there somewhere that's going to point me in roughly the right direction if I have a little think.
In comparison to Chris's music cue, that one was quite short and a bit snipped off. Like I maybe could have given you a couple of extra seconds, but I still think think you're.
All right, that's enough to work with. All right, good
Wicked.
stuff.
Cool.
Oakley dokely. So that concludes today's episode of James Bond Radio, where we're looking at the second part of Goldeneye. We will return next week with the third part of Goldeneye, which I bet you weren't guessing that was coming up, were you? Look at that.
Now, what do we think? Obviously, part one. Banging, super. Yeah. Part two, brilliant. One music thing I'm not happy with, but brilliant. Yeah. Is part three going to stand up to the high standard of part one and part two?
Well, I think you need set pieces in a Bond film, don't you? You need some standout killer moments. So for me, when I think about this film, standout killer moment at the beginning is the whole bungee jump sequence. Great. Yeah. You know, if I think of a standout set piece moment from the middle of the film, it's the tank chase. If I think, okay, let's have a look at the end of the film, you got that massive, satellite dish base, big fight. Like if you think of some classic Bond moments, they always have a fight in a really crazy place where it's on top of a cable car or outer space or wherever it is you might be. And, I feel like Goldeneye has that, in equal measure. So, my prediction is that it's gonna stand up, but we'll obviously find out next time, won't we?
We will, indeed. And I'm really looking forward to having a chat with you post-film, just to see what new stuff you've learned, if your opinion's changed in any way and everything like that. But, so obviously next week we'll delve deep into it.
Well, it's like I said before, I remember the last time I watched this film, which was New Year's Eve, 2012. So going into 2013. So it's been a while. And it's like I said, the reason I consciously chose that because we started the podcast soon after. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to fresh eyes it the whole way through this podcast. So I will not rewatch a film until it's time to rewatch it for the podcast. Hence why it's taken so long for me to rewatch it. And I must say there is some real value in doing that because I was surprised at just how chirpy the film is. Yeah. It's very lighthearted and there's a lot more comedy in there than I remember there being in there. And especially I think that's heightened by the fact that Daniel's run has been so much more leaning the other way, not so much Inspector, obviously, but for most of his run, it's definitely leaning the other way. So it's kind of interesting to be like, oh yeah, that was, in the 90s when everyone was a bit happier and, there was no financial impending doom and,
Well, I guess it's kind of been bookended, isn't it? If you think about it, like Roger was humour, Tim was dark, Pierce was humour, Craig was dark. So does that mean that the next Bond beyond Craig is going to be a bit lighter?
When they give the job to Henry Cavill, I can see him being.
He can do the lines though. Yeah. He can do the lines.
I think he do it. If they go the other way and they give it to old him down in Cornwall, what's his name again?
Aidan Turner.
Yeah, what's his character name that he's famous for? I forget it now.
What, Poldark?
Poldark, yeah. If they give it to old Poldark, I could see him being darker.
Yeah, I can think he could be a bit of a bastard as Bond. And I do want to see Bond as a bastard at some point, but I just don't think that's a big risk though, isn't it, to take, making him a bit of an arsehole, in terms of the public wanting him to be the hero. It's probably not a wise move, but I'd still like to see it. But anyway, I think Cavill does it. You're gonna get some good humour lines. I think like his character in Man from U.N.C.L.E., brilliant. I thought he's so good in that and like really funny. And I think that's probably the way they'll go if he ended up going. But obviously we don't know who's going to be Bond. Yeah. We don't know what way it's going to be. But if we're going on a trend and if we're looking back to see how Bonds of the past have changed, we're in line for a lighter-hearted bit. But then again, obviously, Spectre was a bit more light-hearted, so who knows?
That's true. We'll see. We'll see what 125 ends up like, if that's super light-hearted or whether it's super dark. We will see. Only time will tell.
Exactly.
I think it's about time we wrapped up today's episode, don't you?
I do indeed. So there we are.
I will see you next week in the usual time to talk about Goldeneye, third part. Obviously, the time coming up soon will be for... the listener 90-second review episodes.
Let's put that shout out now, because obviously we've got part 3 next week and we're going to have the listener review episode. So basically we want to listen from everyone, basically everyone listening to this. All you have to do, go to the website, jamesbondradio.com. There's a little button on the right hand side. It says send voicemail. Click on that. 90 seconds. That's all you're getting. You can leave less if you like, but if you want, you've got to make sure you try and get as much in as you can in that 90 seconds. You can't go over that. But if you like the film, if you hate the film, if you your opinions on Brosnan, your opinions on the set pieces, everything like that, all the different characters, the new M, the new Moneypenny, we want to hear from you, and we really want to get a vibe from everyone. Whether you like it or not. Send in your review, and then we'll have a wicked episode where we put all the listener sort of 90-second reviews together as we do. And I do really enjoy those episodes. Just hearing from everyone, and everyone's got their different opinions. And, there might be people out there that absolutely hate Goldeneye, but we'd like to hear from you. And what is it that you don't like about it? Yeah. And equally, I'm sure there are plenty that do love it as well. So get onto the website, send voicemail.
Maybe we should send in a 90-second review this time.
Do you reckon?
What do you think?
Oh, maybe, actually.
I mean, we'll have like 6 hours of review.
I think I'll just say, Goldeneye is very good. And then that'll be my finish.
I love that dude. He never leaves his name. We don't know who he is. But he's that dude with a very strong, I think it's a Greek accent. And I remember it was Fiore's only is very good film.
Oh, yeah.
And that was it. And that's probably my favourite review we've ever had, actually. That was great. God bless you. If you're out there listening, let us know who you are and what your name is, because you made us laugh. But good stuff. All right, then, James Bond Radio will return. My name's been Tom Sears.
My name has been Chris Wright, and it still will be, hopefully.
Good. Absolutely. Right. We will see you next week, everybody.
See everyone. Bye.